Hello. So today we're going to be talking about gliding in FSX and talk about some of the basics of how to fly a glider. So first, what is a glider and what makes it different to a regular aircraft? Well, first, let's be clear on what type of aircraft you can fly in FSX because there's actually several types of glider in the world. What we have available in FSX is actually a sailplane. So a sailplane looks similar to a normal plane. It's typically made out of lightweight materials such as fiberglass or carbon fiber, rather than using metals, which is what most modern aircraft use. Another weight-saving feature is that most sailplanes don't have an engine, so that's another huge chunk of metal missing. Also, because they don't need an engine, they don't need fuel, which means even less weight. Sailplanes tend to have long, slim wings which provide a high lift-to-drag ratio. This means that the aircraft can fly incredibly slow, yet still produce enough lift to fly normally. So this aircraft that you're looking at right now is the DG Flugzeugbau 808S, and it's the only glider available by default in FSX. This aircraft is actually an advanced model of glider which is used in competitions such as gliding races or gliding aerobatics, so it has a couple of advanced features which I'll touch on later. So inside you can see that it's a very different cockpit to what you're probably used to seeing. We have a carbon fiber panel and only a few instruments. That said, you can see that we have fantastic visibility outside and all around the aircraft. So let's run through some of the instruments briefly. On the top center of the panel you have a magnetic compass to read your current heading. The first main instrument is your airspeed indicator, which measures your airspeed in knots. In the middle you have a text-based navigation display which gives you things such as weather information and other information regarding your next waypoint along your journey. Now I'm not sure how to use this instrument properly, I'm just going to say that now. After that you have an altimeter for reading your altitude. Now the next instrument here is called a variometer, and it works very much like a vertical speed indicator. This tells you how fast you're climbing or descending. In this aircraft, it also makes sounds. When the aircraft is climbing, it will make a steady beeping sound, which will increase in speed the faster you're climbing. When you're descending, it plays a steady, dull tone to let you know that you're descending, and I'll demonstrate that later on. Beside that is a very similar instrument. I believe that this is simply another variometer. It behaves pretty much exactly the same way as the first variometer, however this one doesn't make any noise. Below those instruments you have a turn coordinator on the left and a communication radio on the right so that you can call up airports. And then finally, underneath that, hiding behind the control stick, you have a transponder on the left hand side and several buttons for controlling the instruments on the right. The AVCS button is the avionics master switch, so you can turn off electricity for all of the electrically controlled instruments such as the radios and navigation. Gyro will turn off the turn coordinator instrument, and Vario will turn off the left variometer instrument there. It's also quite handy when you get annoyed with its constant beeping noises. Let's look around at some of the other controls in here as well. Starting on the left we have a black lever which controls the flaps on the glider. Now if you look very closely you'll notice that this aircraft actually has two negative flap settings. This is one of the advanced features of this aircraft, being a competition grade aircraft. I'll be covering why gliders have negative flaps in a later video, but just for this overview, just so you know, this is where the flaps are. The blue lever here is the speed brake, which is very important in a glider. Because they have such good lift performance, you will definitely need to use the speed brakes when conducting an approach for landing, for both controlling the speed and reducing lift. Underneath those you'll see a tiny green lever here. This is actually your pitch trim, so you can slide that back and forth to adjust the trim of the aircraft. And underneath all of those controls you have a landing gear lever. So the 808S has a single wheel underneath the fuselage which can be lowered for ground operations and then retracted for flights. In the middle there's two main controls. The first one is this yellow ball, which is actually the tow rope release. So you might already know that a common way to get a glider into the air is by attaching it to a powered aircraft using a tow rope. The powered aircraft then takes off and pulls the glider into the air behind it. To release that tow rope from the glider, you would simply pull on this yellow control. And then front and center, as you could probably guess, you have a joystick style control, which is your main pitch and roll control. The black button on the top is your radio button, push to talk. Also, you can't see it from this view, but gliders do also have rudder pedals for yaw control. Then on the right hand side, there's a couple more controls. First, you have this metal hook, which is actually the battery master switch, so you can turn that on or off, again to control the electrically powered instruments. Now, there's a little brown thing here that you cannot click on. It looks like it does have a purpose in the aircraft, but you can't do anything with it in the sim, so don't worry about that. Above that, you have a red and white lever. So the white one is a simple lock for the canopy, just to make sure it locks closed. However, the red one, I believe, is an emergency canopy release. I read somewhere that pilots who fly in gliding competitions, whether that be gliding races or gliding aerobatics, the pilots are actually required to wear a parachute in the event of an emergency. So if an emergency did occur, they would simply pull that red lever to pop off the canopy and then literally jump out and parachute to safety. The final controls here are these two small metal levers which control the water ballast in the aircraft. So water can be used to increase the weight of a glider, which changes how it handles and how it flies. Again, this is an advanced feature because this is a competition aircraft, and I'll talk about that again in a later video once I understand the concept of ballast in a glider a bit better. Finally, a little bit of trivia. On the right here, you also have your microphone for radio communications. So because there's no loud engine to try and talk over, glider pilots actually don't wear headsets. They simply talk into a kind of standard microphone like this and listen to ATC radio chatter through loudspeakers. Okay, so let's have a look at how we actually start a flight with a glider. So there's two ways that we can do this. The first is by using something called slew mode. So that's where you can kind of position the aircraft manually within a 3D environment. So if you press Y for Yankee, you can see that you get a little slew kind of icon in the bottom right corner there. So to lift the aircraft into the air, you can press Q for Quebec, and it will raise the altitude, and the aircraft will gain altitude just in a straight up direction. However, there's a much better method to get in the glider in the air, so we're not going to do that. So I'm just going to press Z for Zulu to bring the aircraft back down to the ground, and then once we hit the ground, we'll press Y to exit slew mode, and we'll do a more realistic method of getting the aircraft into the air, which is actually by spawning a tow plane. So before I do that, I'm going to talk about a couple of things. So the keyboard combination to spawn a tow plane is Control plus Shift plus Y for Yankee. So when I do that, what will happen is you'll notice an aircraft will just pop up in front of the glider, and then it will stand or it will sit on the runway still for a few seconds, and then it will start to accelerate down the runway. As it accelerates down the runway, it's already got a tow rope attached to the glider, so the glider will start to be pulled forward. Now, because gliders have such good lift performance, the glider will actually take off before the tow plane does. So as the tow plane accelerates and takes off itself, what you have to do is you actively have to control the glider and fly the glider and keep it directly behind the tow plane as best as you can. So yeah, I'm going to do that just now. So Control plus Shift plus Y, we have the tow plane there. So it just sits for a few seconds. So what you'll also notice as we start moving is the variometer will start to sound as well. You can hear that kind of dull tone. So it acts a bit funny when you're on the ground, but as we get into flights, the variometer will work properly. So the glider's getting pretty light now, so we're just going to lift off. There we go, and the tow plane is in the air as well. So all I'm going to do is just try and fly the aircraft, or fly the glider, sorry, and keep it behind the tow plane as best as I can. Now you can hear that constant quick beeping sound, so that's the variometer telling us that we're climbing, and obviously we're climbing because we're being towed into the air. So I'm just going to turn the variometer off just now, and I'll demonstrate how that works properly as well. You'll also notice that as I turn the variometer off, the left-hand variometer has kind of gone dead almost. It's back to 0. However, the right hand one is still showing a positive rate of climb. So it's yeah, so that's how those two work there. As I said, I'll explain the variometer in a bit more detail in a minute's time or so. So I believe that the tow plane will just climb straight. It won't turn at all. It will just continue flying in a straight line and continue climbing as long as you are connected to it. So once we get to about 1,500 feet, what I will do is press Shift plus Y, which is the keyboard combination to disconnect the tow rope. Alternatively, you could just click on the yellow tow release there. So we're up at, hitting a bit of turbulence there, not a problem. So up at 1,500 feet, so I'm going to press Shift plus Y. You hear a gentle clunk. The tow aircraft turns off to the side, and we are now gliding all by ourselves. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the plane just round to a gentle turn to the right. So the first thing I want to talk about is this aircraft's performance. So the best glide speed for this glider is 57 knots. So that gives you the maximum distance with the least amount of altitude loss. So if you're flying, if you trim the aircraft for 57 knots, then that will give you the most distance under pure gliding performance. Of course, you don't have to fly at that. It's not a complete strict, rigid rule. You can. It's a glider. It's designed to just have fun with. You can see you've got good visibility. So just enjoy. I always find gliding a much purer form of flying, because you don't have engines. It's just you and the elements, and you can just go anywhere really. So for those of you who care, 57 knots is the best glide speed, but by no means do you have to stay at that glide speed. It's an aircraft to just have fun with, so have fun with it basically. So I think now would be a good time to show off the variometer and sort of demonstrate how that works. All I'm going to do is just kind of fly downwind here to runway 05 at Inverness, and then we'll come in for a landing here. So I'm going to turn the variometer back on, and you can see that while we're at about 0, so while we're flying level, you notice that we don't have a tone at all coming through the loudspeakers. So what I'm going to do is start to descend, so just push the nose down, and you can hear that we get that dull low tone. And the faster that you're descending, the lower the tone gets. And then consequently, if we begin to climb, we start off with slow beeping, and then the faster we climb, the beeping sort of gets more frantic and a bit higher pitched and stuff, and gets quicker. So that's how the variometer works. So rather than constantly looking down at the variometer, you can use those audio cues, so you can keep your eyes outside of the plane and away from the instrument panel, and you can use those audio cues to tell whether you're climbing or descending, like so. So now we're gonna just bring it back in for a landing. So there are ways that you can extend the flight by using things such as thermals and updrafts. I'm going to talk about those in the next video, because those require quite a lot of explanation, and I want to use some graphics to help visualize and demonstrate how those works. But for just a pure getting up into the air, flying about and coming back down, that's kind of what I'm covering in this video. So I'm going to talk about landing technique in a glider. So gliders do have flaps like regular aircraft, and much like regular aircraft, those allow the glider to fly at a slower speed yet still produce enough lift to fly safely. So what I'm going to do is just going to continue on past the end of the runway here for a little bit. And I'm also going to start thinking about descending. Not sure what my flap setting is. I think I've still got some wacky flap setting after after adjusting them in the kind of the previous video clip where I was explaining all the controls there. So do that there. So remember also that this aircraft does have retractable landing gear, so I did retract the landing gear off the takeoff. I don't think I mentioned it, but you know, you also need to be aware that you don't have any lights or any indication, so you need to like physically look down at the lever to make sure that the wheel has been extended or retracted. So at the moment it's retracted, and when the black lever on left there is pushed forward, that means that the landing gear has been extended and you're safe to land. So I'm going to add in another stage of flaps there, just to help the aircraft slow down a little bit more. Now again, because gliders have really good glide performance, I did say earlier that you're going to be using the speed brake a lot to control the speed. Using the speed brake and giving the glider variable amounts of speed brake is actually like using the power in a light aircraft. That allows you to control the rate of descent and kind of control your vertical speed as you come into approach for landing. Now I'm not going to be doing it properly. I'm going to be using a just the keyboard shortcut / to control it, so it's going to be a bit jerky and a bit awkward. So I'm going to go full speed brake there, and you can see the airspeed's coming down. But then if I wanted to increase or decrease the rate of descent, bring the speed brake back up, and the aircraft picks up speed, picks up lift performance again. So that's kind of how you manage your vertical speed. What we'll do is retract the landing gear, or sorry, extend the landing gear a bit high, so we'll go speed brake again. I'll go another stage of flaps to help myself slow down. So landing technique in the glider, what you want to do is you want to kind of aim, you're kind of looking about 200 or 300 feet before where you want to land. So I'm actually going to try and aim to land on the displaced threshold of the runway here, and then just before I touch down I'm going to flare the aircraft, and it's going to float for quite a while because it's got such good kind of lift performance. And then you basically, like a light aircraft, you're just going to hold the aircraft in a flare until it bleeds off airspeed, and until it effectively stalls and just gently drops onto the runway. So I'm going to be aiming to hit the displaced threshold. Okay, so we look like we're going to hit the main threshold now. So I'm going to put the speed brakes out again just to help myself slow down, and then we're going to flare and just hold that. Oops, that was a bit of a bad landing. Hit the tail first, but ideally you should be landing kind of flat, so the main wheel should hit before the back wheel there. And then as you're coming to a stop, you also want to try and keep the wings level as well. So you're going to be doing a lot of roll movement just to keep the wings level so that a wingtip doesn't dip down and bash the runway there. As I said, that was a bad landing. I hit the tail down first. As I said, you should be landing pretty much with a flat attitude, or as best as you can to that. So there you go. So that was a very quick basic flight in a glider. As I said, in my next video I'm going to talk about ways that you can extend the flight and sort of some gliding kind of endurance tips. So we're going to be talking about finding thermals, which are kind of currents of air, hot air, which rise. So you can use a glider, you can fly into a thermal and you'll gain altitude that way. You can also gain altitude by flying with updrafts or kind of upward deflections of wind over mountainous terrain. So as I said, I'll talk about those in detail in the next video. But for this video, I'm gonna leave it there. So firstly, I'm going to say a massive thank you to my patrons who support me there over on Patreon. As I always say, you guys supporting me there really does mean the world to me. So thank you all very much for that. I really do appreciate it. And thank you everyone who watched this video. So for now, thank you all very much for watching. Take care out there, and I'll catch you all later.